Hey everybody, we're sitting at home so that we can show you how to glaze at home. So I have this glaze from Mouse called Chan, $10 a pint. Check it out on our website. I've also prepared a space that's relatively clean. This is an optional coverage for the table. You can use plastic, paper, anything disposable. We've used this multiple times for hand building. So it's just gonna help us keep things a little bit more clean. I have my brushes. It's not a bad idea if you're using more than one glaze color to have a container of water to rinse your brushes in. And I have my bisque pieces. We're offering firings right now, so feel free to have us bisque your work so that you can glaze it. You always want to bisque fire your work before you glaze it. And this, I have a kitchen bowl. So this is, at home glazing. You're gonna need something like this if you decide to use the pouring method. I'm going to show you how to glaze with pouring or brushing. You could also dip pieces that are small enough, but I'm going to show you how to pour. Okay? So the one thing you want to do is with your glaze, the first thing you want to do is shake it up. Make sure that the glaze is completely in suspension. Make sure the lid is on, because you don't want your bowl to have glaze all over it. So I'm going to open this up. We have our glaze, which is pretty full, and we have various paintbrushes here. So you might want to dampen the brush before you start painting with it. I'm not going to. So you want at least 3 coats of glaze if you're painting it on, especially for people who are used to dunking glazes into a bucket. 1 dunk into a bucket is approximately equivalent to 3 brush coats. And usually when I brush, what I do is I'll load the brush with glaze so that it's not dripping. I'll kind of like empty the brush off a little bit on the side, and then I will apply brush strokes in one direction. So this is just upward right now. And I've decided already not to glaze the inside of this one. That was just a choice I made. If you are glazing the inside, I do recommend glazing the inside first. So all the brush strokes right now are in the same direction. They're all upward strokes. Okay, so I have 1 coat of glaze. If I fire this, the glaze is not going to appear the way I'm used to it appearing. It's going to be streaky. So what I want to do is add 2 more coats, and you want each coat to dry before you add the next coat. So this glaze, when it's wet, it's very shiny and kind of glistens. When it's dry, it's matte, and you can touch it without it coming off on your hand. Okay? So because the first coat, the brush strokes were upward, the second coat, I'm going to do the brush strokes horizontally. Just holding on to the foot here. You could also put your piece on the Lazy Susan or on the table. Be creative. As I brush it, it dries out pretty quickly. The bisque is very kind of thirsty, and it's sucking up the glaze very quickly. So now what we have is bisque with 2 coats of glaze on it. Okay. So now I could either go in a diagonal, or I could return to being vertical brush strokes, but I do want to change direction. It gives you a very even coat that doesn't kind of show the brush strokes at all when you put 3 coats and alternate in direction. I'm going to put the 3rd coat on, just another upward stroke. So this is coat 3. Now when this is fired, the glaze will appear as I'm expecting it to. Sometimes glazes are too thin. If you only put 1 coat on, the glaze comes out different. Not always a bad thing, it depends. It really depends on the glaze. You can get different effects. And of course, this is kind of like a basic coat my pot type of glazing. If you wanted to paint designs on, you could do that, or sponge on your glaze or splatter it on. But this is a very basic. Okay, so that's it. Now this has 3 coats of glaze on it. I can now have it fired in the kiln. Make sure that anytime you're glazing, you don't glaze the bottom of your piece, the piece that touches the shelf or touches a table. Okay, so put that aside for now. Here's my other piece of bisque. This one I want to show you how to pour glazes. It's a lot messier, but you're going to get the same effect as you would if you were in the studio and you were dipping this into a bucket. So the reason I have this larger bowl is to catch the glaze. I'm going to pour glaze into this and I'm going to pour it out. I'm either going to pour it out into the bowl or into the original container. It depends. And I always want to pour the inside first. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to empty it out here. So I'm going to fill the bowl up with glaze and then empty out. And as I empty it out, I'm going to turn it around so that it coats. Okay, so I got the whole inside. Still got a little bit of spillage on the outside. It kind of looks interesting, but if the glaze is very sensitive to layers, I could scrape the outside, but I'm not going to do that. So now I'm going to pour the glaze back into the container so that I can use it again on the outside. Okay. And I'm trying to be tidy. I'm getting a little bit messy and I don't have a paper towel here, but you will have a towel when you do yours. So I've got the inside coated. Again, if I wanted to, I could scrape off some of this, but I'm gonna leave it. I'm actually gonna hold on to this part that dripped so that I can try to coat the rest of this. I'm gonna pour a little bit of this out. It's a little full. And I'm gonna just take this and coat the entire thing. You could have alternately, instead of holding it here, you could have sat it on like a jar that was sitting in the bowl and poured it. And you could have gotten this area that my fingers are touching. So I'm gonna put this down for a second, and while it dries, I'm gonna grab a wet paper towel. You might need to have a container of water here to really remove enough glaze from the bottom. You just want to remember to allow your piece to dry before handling it. And before you fire your piece, you always want to clean the foot off. So I'm gonna just sponge off glaze until I can see the clay body peek through. And if your glaze is runny, you might also need to go up the side a bit. Let's see. An old kitchen sponge might be better. It's okay for now. There's a lot of iron in this glaze, so it stains the clay. Just want to make sure that the foot doesn't have glaze on it. I would also perhaps clean up around the sides a little bit more too. But just make sure there's no glaze on the bottom of either, and then you can bring them back to the studio and have them fired a second time, and they'll be all done. Good luck glazing at home.
Part 2, the cleanup.
So our pieces are glazed. I was able to obtain a basin with water and a sponge. Now this is my sponge, that's an old kitchen sponge that I only use for ceramics at home. And the basin is where we put our reclaim, and that was cleaned out. I wouldn't recommend pouring clay materials down your sink, so what I would recommend is cleaning up in a basin that's dedicated for ceramics. Put clean water in your basin. Take all the glaze that's left in your bowl and kind of scrape it and get it into your jar. Okay. So that's got most of the stuff out. I take my sponge, and I made a little bit of a mess here. So I'm gonna clean up. I'm gonna clean up my jar. Okay. Gonna place the lid securely on. Make sure it's still not making a mess. Okay, so that's kind of out of play. Also, speaking of sponge, if I had the sponge before, I definitely probably would have cleaned the foot off with the sponge itself. So, just saying, I didn't have it a minute ago. So here's how cleanup's gonna go. I took all the excess glaze out of here. Now I'm gonna wipe it clean with the sponge. I'm gonna rinse the sponge off in my basin. And I'll continue to do that over and over again. So the basin is gonna hold all of the ceramic materials. By the way, glazes are made of ceramic materials, just as clay is. So what I'm doing is I'm gonna rinse that into the basin. After the basin has sat for 24 hours or more, you'll notice that all of the ceramic material has settled out of the water. Then you can pour the water off down the drain or down the toilet, and you can scrape the sediment into the garbage can. That's what I would recommend. You could even let all of the water evaporate, and you'll have a hard crust that you could scrape out of your container, okay? But for now, the bowl is in pretty good shape, so we can wash this in the regular sink now, because most of the glaze has been removed from that. And the brush can be rinsed out in here as well. Now this is an iron bearing glaze, so the brush might get stained, but as long as you rinse out most of the glaze into that water, then you can rinse this in the sink. So both of these can be rinsed in the sink now, but they're pretty clean. This is garbage, and that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to email us or contact us.